Have you ever heard a nursery rhyme that just doesn't sit right? Something so unsettling, so strange, that it feels like it belongs to a time or place that's lost in the shadows of memory. What if I told you that this eerie, forgotten rhyme could be linked to a real-life mystery, a mystery of something far darker than any bedtime song? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to uncover the chilling truth behind a seemingly innocent nursery rhyme and how it might be tied to a terrifying abduction that no one has remembered, until now. I know you're probably thinking, it's just a rhyme, right? How bad can it really be? But trust me, by the time we're done, you might never hear a simple nursery rhyme the same way again. So, I'm asking you, are you ready to uncover the truth? You won't believe where this strange story takes us, and you might just start wondering, what happened that we've all forgotten? Building connection and intrigue, 2 minutes. Picture this: you're walking down the street, minding your own business, when you hear a familiar tune in the distance. It's a nursery rhyme, something you haven't thought about in years. But for some reason, this time, it feels different. It doesn't sound like it should. It's almost as if the words are speaking directly to you. You can't shake the feeling that something is hidden within those simple lines. Maybe it's a memory you didn't even know you had, but it's still there, deep in your mind. Now, what if I told you this eerie experience is not as random as it seems? There's a reason you're hearing that rhyme, and there's a reason you're feeling that unsettling tug in the back of your mind. I'm sure you've heard it before, those nursery rhymes we all grow up with. Twinkle, twinkle little star, rock-a-bye baby, ring-a-ring-o roses. Classic. Comforting, even. But have you ever stopped to think about the origins of these songs? The hidden stories behind them? For most people, these rhymes are just part of childhood, a comforting ritual, a lullaby to drift off to sleep by. But if you dig deeper, you'll find that there's something far darker tied to these nursery rhymes. Many of them have roots in ancient folklore, steeped in strange traditions, and even darker events. And today, I'm going to tell you a story that connects a specific nursery rhyme to a long-forgotten abduction, a tale that has been buried in time and memory for years, only to resurface now, like a whisper in the wind. Developing suspense and creating atmosphere, 3 minutes. It all starts with a woman named Sarah. Just an ordinary woman, living an ordinary life, until one day, she hears a nursery rhyme that she thought was long lost to the past. She was walking through the park, enjoying a peaceful afternoon, when out of nowhere, she heard it. It was quiet at first, just a faint whisper on the breeze. But as Sarah listened, the words became clearer. Come play with me, follow the light, in the woods we'll hide from sight. The moment those words hit her ears, a chill ran down her spine. She couldn't place it at first, where had she heard this? But it was so unsettling, like a memory tugging at the edge of her thoughts, just out of reach. She had heard this rhyme before, long ago. But where? And why did it make her feel like she was in danger? Sarah couldn't shake the feeling. She spent weeks trying to forget about it, but the words kept echoing in her mind, pulling her deeper into a mystery she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Soon, strange things began to happen. Her dreams were filled with images of a forest, a dark, ominous forest, with something lurking inside it. In her dreams, she followed the rhyme deeper and deeper into the trees, unable to escape. And each time, she woke up terrified, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. But Sarah wasn't the only one affected by this rhyme. As she dug deeper into her childhood memories, she realized that the rhyme had been part of her family history, a story told by her grandmother when Sarah was just a little girl. But what her grandmother had said about the rhyme was far more terrifying than Sarah had remembered. Introducing the mystery, 5 minutes. You see, Sarah's grandmother used to tell her a story about an old family mystery, something that had been whispered in their small town for generations. When Sarah was young, she had no idea what it all meant, but now, as she grew older, everything was beginning to make sense. Decades ago, there had been a child, an innocent, carefree child, who had gone missing from the town. The case was never solved, and the child was never found. But as it turns out, the rhyme Sarah had heard so many years ago was connected to this very disappearance. It was no coincidence that Sarah had heard it again. The missing child, it seemed, had vanished while playing near the woods right around the same time that the rhyme had started to circulate in the town. The townsfolk had always believed it was just a coincidence, But what if it wasn't? What if the rhyme was more than just a silly tune? What if it was some kind of message, one that had been buried, suppressed, and forgotten, only to resurface now? And that's when Sarah began to make the connection. The rhyme, the disappearance, it all started to fit together, piece by piece. The rhyme had been passed down through generations, a warning, maybe, or a key to understanding what had happened to that lost child all those years ago. Creating psychological depth, 6 minutes. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This sounds like the plot of a mystery novel or a horror movie. But this is no fictional story. This is real. This is happening. And if you think about it, there's a lot more to the story than you might initially realize. You see, this is about more than just one missing child or one strange nursery rhyme. This is about how we, as humans, deal with memory, trauma, and the things we wish we could forget. Sometimes, we bury these memories so deep, we think they're gone forever. But then something, like an old nursery rhyme, pulls them back to the surface, reminding us of things we'd rather not remember. But why did this rhyme come back now? Why did Sarah, someone who hadn't thought about it in years, suddenly hear it again? Was it a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? As Sarah delved deeper into the mystery, she began to notice more connections, strange coincidences that didn't add up. Old photographs, town records, and even a few long-forgotten letters revealed unsettling truths. As the pieces started to fall into place, Sarah realized that the story she thought she knew was only the tip of the iceberg. There were secrets buried in her family's past that no one had ever dared to uncover, and she was about to expose them. Cliffhanger, 1 minute. So, what happens next? Well, that's where the story takes a turn you won't see coming. Just when Sarah thought she had it all figured out, something happened that changed everything. But I can't give it away just yet. Trust me when I say this, you won't want to miss what happens next. The truth is far darker than anyone could have ever imagined, and the final reveal will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this nursery rhyme and the abduction it's linked to. Stick around, because you're about to learn the real story behind this forgotten rhyme and the terrifying truth that has been hidden for so long. Stay with me, because you won't believe what's coming next. As Sarah dug deeper into the strange nursery rhyme, she realized that the unsettling feelings it had stirred weren't just fleeting memories or childhood imaginings. No, something about this rhyme was tied to a much larger mystery, a dark and twisted puzzle that was beginning to unravel in ways she hadn't expected. For weeks, she had been spending her nights combing through old family photos and town records, trying to piece together the fragments of the past that had slipped through the cracks of her memory. Her relationship with her grandmother, once a source of comfort, had now become a source of confusion and suspicion. In those early days, her grandmother had always been the one to tell her the stories, the one who kept the family history alive. But now, as Sarah pieced together the odd details and troubling omissions, she started to wonder just how much her grandmother had known about the truth. Had she hidden something from Sarah? Or perhaps even from herself? The more Sarah thought about it, the more it seemed like there was a deliberate effort to erase the truth. The town's collective memory had wiped away any mention of the missing child. People had long since forgotten, or at least pretended to forget. But Sarah wasn't ready to let go. Something about the rhyme felt like it was calling her back, forcing her to confront the past she never truly understood. Every time she tried to let it go, the rhyme would return, as if it was refusing to let her forget. Her nights grew restless, and sleep became elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she was pulled into vivid dreams of dark woods and strange figures hiding in the shadows. Sometimes, she could almost make out their faces, twisted with something that wasn't quite malice, but something worse, an indifference, a coldness that made her shiver even in the warmth of her bed. It felt like she was being watched, but by who, and why? The deeper Sarah went into the mystery, the more she began to feel like she was losing herself to it. The line between dream and reality blurred, and she started to question her own sanity. But Sarah wasn't alone in this search. Over the past few weeks, she had confided in a few people, close friends, her childhood neighbor, and even a distant relative she barely remembered from her past. At first, she hadn't wanted to burden anyone with her obsession. It felt like a personal journey, something that needed to be solved alone. But as the days turned into weeks, The weight of the mystery started to feel too heavy to bear by herself. The people she reached out to were all sympathetic, offering comforting words and well-meaning advice. They all listened attentively, nodding, expressing concern, and even helping her look through old records. But none of them seemed to understand what Sarah was feeling, what she had uncovered. They brushed off her suspicions as simple paranoia, suggesting that she was just overthinking it, or that she'd been affected by the stressful nature of her job. But Sarah knew better. She could feel it in her gut, the connections were real, and they were leading her somewhere dangerous. It wasn't until she met up with someone from her past, Evan, a childhood friend who had disappeared from her life after high school, that things started to take an unexpected turn. Evan had always been a bit of an oddball, someone who had an affinity for the strange and the mysterious. He'd been the kind of person to dive into conspiracy theories and urban legends, often dragging Sarah along for the ride. But something about him now felt different. He seemed less like the carefree friend she'd once known and more like someone carrying a heavy burden. Their reunion was awkward at first, filled with long silences and nervous laughter, but it wasn't long before the topic of the missing child and the nursery rhyme came up. To Sarah's surprise, Evan seemed to know more about the town's past than he let on. He spoke with a kind of certainty that unsettled her, as if he had been sitting on pieces of information for years but had never shared them with anyone. His cryptic comments about the rhyme and its ties to the town's darkest secrets only made Sarah more determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. But Evan's sudden reappearance wasn't without its own strange coincidences. The more Sarah uncovered, the more she started to realize that his return wasn't as random as it seemed. There were too many things lining up, too many little oddities that made her question his true intentions. He'd been gone for years, and yet somehow, he seemed to know exactly where to look and what questions to ask. He was too knowledgeable about the town's history, too familiar with the places Sarah had been searching. It wasn't long before she started to wonder, was Evan helping her, or was he leading her down a path she wasn't meant to follow? She tried to ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right about him, but the more they talked, the more she began to suspect that Evan might be hiding something from her, something that could change everything. And then there was the mysterious letter. It arrived one rainy afternoon, tucked into the cracks of Sarah's front door, with no return address and no explanation. The handwriting was barely legible, the ink smudged as if the writer had been in a hurry. The letter spoke of the town's past, about things long buried and forgotten, things that had been carefully erased from everyone's memory. It mentioned the nursery rhyme by name, suggesting that Sarah's investigation had uncovered more than she could handle. It warned her to stop looking, to let it go before it was too late. But the most chilling part was the last line, "You're not the first to follow the rhyme. You won't be the last." Who had sent the letter? And what did they mean by that? It could have been a prank, a sick joke from someone who knew what she was looking into, but Sarah didn't think so. There was something too urgent in the words, something too personal. Whoever had written it knew exactly what Sarah had been doing, and they knew she wouldn't stop until she had answers. This wasn't some random threat. This was a warning, one that felt far more serious than anything she had encountered so far. As the mystery deepened, Sarah found herself caught in a web of questions, red herrings, and unsettling revelations. Was Evan involved? Did her grandmother know more than she had let on? What was the real story behind the missing child? And who was behind the letter? Each answer seemed to raise more questions, and the closer Sarah got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. But the rhyme, the haunting melody that had started it all, still echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that the past was not as forgotten as everyone had hoped. With every step she took, Sarah felt herself being pulled deeper into a world that she didn't fully understand, a world where nothing was as it seemed, and where the truth was buried so deeply that it was nearly impossible to unearth. But she couldn't stop now. She had to find out what happened to the missing child. She had to uncover the truth about the rhyme and its dark origins. Because one thing was certain, no matter how far down this path she went, there was no turning back. As Sarah continued to dig deeper, the walls seemed to close in around her. The mystery that had once felt like a puzzle she could piece together, one clue at a time, was starting to feel like an insurmountable mountain. Her mother was in danger, too. The connection between the letters made it all too clear. This was bigger than just Sarah. Someone had been watching her family, and they weren't afraid to send a message to make it known. What troubled Sarah most was the timing of it all. Just as she was starting to feel the pressure mounting, her mother was pulled into the mystery in a way she could never have predicted. It was as if the universe had conspired to make sure that no one in Sarah's life would be safe. The danger was no longer confined to her search, it was spreading to everyone close to her. Sarah tried to remain calm, to focus on what she could control. She promised her mother that she would be more careful, that she would stop looking for answers if it meant keeping her safe. But deep down, Sarah knew she couldn't back down now, not when everything was so close to unraveling. The rhyme, the missing child, the strange figures hiding in the shadows, it all felt like it was leading somewhere that Sarah couldn't let go of. But with her mother now involved, the stakes had risen to an entirely new level. In the days that followed, things only grew more intense. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her every move was being watched. Her investigation had always felt like a personal journey, something she was meant to uncover, but now it felt like a trap, one that had been set long before she had even begun. The people around her, those she had trusted most, were all somehow tied to the mystery in ways that she couldn't yet fully understand. Even Evan, the childhood friend who had seemed like a helpful ally, had started to act strangely again. Sarah had begun to notice small inconsistencies in his behavior, moments when he seemed to know too much or avoided certain topics with an air of discomfort. It was like he was hiding something, but what? And more importantly, why was he so insistent that she stop digging? Was it because he genuinely cared about her safety, or because he had something to lose? The closer Sarah got to the truth, the more she realized that Evan's motives were as murky as everyone else's. Could he be hiding his own dark secrets? Just when Sarah thought things couldn't get any more complicated, a piece of evidence surfaced that made her question everything she had believed up until that point. While searching through old town records, Sarah stumbled upon a name that she hadn't expected to find: her father. The connection wasn't immediately clear, but the more Sarah read, the more she realized that her father had been linked to the case of the missing child in some way. It wasn't just his name in the town archives, there were old police reports that referenced him, too, though his involvement was never fully explained. The more she dug, the more she uncovered. Her father had been in the town the year the child had disappeared, working on a case that had been shrouded in secrecy. But why had no one ever mentioned this before? Why had her mother never said anything about it? The discovery sent Sarah into a whirlwind of questions. Her father had been a part of this from the beginning. Had he known about the rhyme? Had he been involved in the disappearance of the child? Or was he merely a pawn in a larger game? Sarah tried to reach out to her mother for answers, but the lines of communication were strained. Her mother had grown more distant, more afraid, as if she knew things she hadn't told Sarah. It was almost as though her mother, too, was hiding something she wasn't ready to face. The deeper Sarah dug, the more tangled the web became. Her own family had secrets, and they weren't just secrets about the past, they were secrets about Sarah's own involvement in this mystery. With every new discovery, the stakes continued to rise. Who could Sarah trust? Was Evan an ally, or was he playing a part in some larger, more sinister plan? What role had her father really played in the disappearance of the child? And why had her mother never mentioned his involvement? The truth seemed to be slipping further and further away, obscured by layers of deception and lies. And as Sarah's world spun further out of control, she couldn't help but wonder if the answers she sought would ever truly set her free, or if they would only drag her deeper into a nightmare from which there was no escape. The danger had escalated, the mystery had thickened, and Sarah knew that the final pieces of the puzzle were closer than ever before, but they were locked behind a door she might never be able to open. The tension that had been building over the past few weeks finally reached a breaking point late one night when Sarah was heading home from yet another fruitless search for answers. The dim glow of the streetlights barely illuminated the winding road leading to her house, and the night felt heavier than usual, almost suffocating. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, though every time she glanced in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there, just the shadowy darkness behind her. It was a feeling she had grown all too familiar with over the past few days, a gnawing sensation in the pit of her stomach that made her skin crawl. The sense of being followed, of being watched, was becoming unbearable, and it wasn't just paranoia. She could feel it in her bones, the pressure mounting with each passing hour. As she turned onto her street, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a dark figure standing near her front door. The silhouette was barely visible against the night sky, but there was something undeniably menacing about it. Sarah's heart raced, her breath caught in her throat. She pulled into her driveway and killed the engine, but before she could even think about getting out, the figure vanished into the shadows, disappearing so quickly it almost seemed unnatural. Panic seized her. Who was that? Why were they there? The feeling of being hunted intensified, but now it wasn't just a vague sense, someone had been waiting for her. Shaking, Sarah stepped out of the car and cautiously walked toward her front door, her mind reeling with a dozen possible explanations. Maybe it was someone who had made a mistake, or perhaps it was just a neighbor who didn't know what they were doing. But as she reached for the door handle, something caught her eye, a small, folded piece of paper wedged into the crack of the door. The paper was old, weathered, its edges frayed as if it had been handled many times before. With trembling hands, Sarah pulled it free and opened it. The handwriting was the same, unmistakable in its eerie familiarity. It was the same as the letters she had received, the ones sent to her mother. The message on the page was brief, but it sent a shockwave of terror through her. "You should have stopped." The words echoed in Sarah's mind, leaving her paralyzed in fear. Her fingers trembled as she read them again, her heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She wasn't just getting too close to the truth, she was a threat to whoever was trying to bury it. And they weren't afraid to send a message anymore. They were watching her, waiting for her to slip up, to give them a reason to make her disappear. She backed away from the door, feeling as though the walls were closing in around her. Her every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, but she couldn't. She couldn't leave now, not when she was so close to uncovering everything. But that night wasn't the worst of it. The next morning, Sarah received a call that shattered any sense of safety she had left. It was Evan, but the voice on the other end wasn't his. It was rough, distorted, as though the person speaking had tried to mask their voice. For a moment, she didn't know whether to scream or hang up, but then the voice spoke again, this time with a cold, cruel tone. "Stop digging. If you care about the people around you, you'll stop." The words felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that Sarah wasn't just risking her own life anymore, she was putting everyone she cared about in danger. "Your mother's not the only one at risk," the voice continued, sending a chill down her spine. "You'll be the one to pay the price if you keep going. We'll make sure of it." The line went dead before Sarah could even process what had just been said. Her hands were shaking so violently that she had to sit down, her head spinning with a mix of terror and confusion. Who had just called her? Was it the same person who had been sending the letters, or was it someone else entirely, someone with a personal stake in her investigation? The idea that her family, her friends, even Evan might be caught in the crossfire sent waves of dread washing over her. She couldn't help but think back to Michael, to the way he had warned her to stop. Had he known something? Had he been involved in a way she hadn't understood? And what about Evan? Was he an ally or part of the web of deceit she had gotten tangled in? It was then that Sarah realized just how far she had gone down this path, how deeply she had dug into a past that seemed to want to stay hidden. She had no idea who she could trust anymore. The people who had once been close to her, her family, her friends, were all potential threats now. Even Michael, the man who had once been her grandfather's friend, seemed to be hiding something. There were too many people with too many secrets, and the truth was slipping further out of reach with each new turn. But just as Sarah was beginning to feel like she was losing control, something even worse happened. That evening, as she sat in her kitchen trying to piece together her next move, she heard a soft knock on the door. It was gentle, almost tentative, but it still sent her heart racing. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked toward the door, every instinct telling her to look through the peephole first. When she did, she saw nothing, just the dark outline of the porch in the evening light. Confused, she cracked open the door, her hand still gripping the handle, ready to slam it shut if needed. But as soon as the door was wide enough, she froze. Standing on her doorstep was someone she hadn't seen in years, her cousin, Caroline. But something about her looked off. Caroline's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes were disheveled, and there was a wildness to her appearance that unsettled Sarah. Sarah, Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible, "You have to stop. They're coming for you." Before Sarah could respond, Caroline stepped inside, her hands shaking as she gripped the doorframe. "I didn't want to believe it," she continued, her voice low and frantic. "But I've seen things. I've heard things. They're going to hurt you. You're not the first one they've done this to. Please, you have to stop." Sarah tried to make sense of her cousin's words, but Caroline was barely coherent, her panic too raw for Sarah to keep up with. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, Caroline collapsed in a heap on the floor, her body shaking uncontrollably. Sarah knelt beside her, trying to make sense of what was happening, but then something caught her eye, something on Caroline's wrist. A small, dark mark, like a bruise, shaped almost like a handprint. The room seemed to close in on Sarah as the realization hit her. Caroline wasn't just scared, she had been marked, just like the missing child. The same cold terror that had followed Sarah had found its way to her cousin. This was no coincidence. Whoever or whatever was behind the disappearance of the child, behind the threats, behind the mystery, it was all connected. The mark on Caroline's wrist was a chilling reminder of that, and it was a sign that Sarah was far from being the only target. The stakes had just become even higher, and now Sarah understood, the people behind this weren't just playing with her. They were playing with everyone she loved. The fear that had gripped Sarah now twisted into something darker, more desperate. Someone, or something, was going to extraordinary lengths to keep the truth hidden. And Sarah had just been pulled deeper into a nightmare where there were no clear allies and no safe places to hide. As Caroline's shallow breathing filled the room and the weight of the situation crashed down on Sarah, she realized there was no turning back now. Whoever was behind this was coming for her family, and the clock was ticking. The truth had become more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. As Sarah sat there in the dimly lit room, watching Caroline tremble on the floor, her mind raced with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Everything was falling apart, her investigation, her sense of safety, and the fragile grasp she had on reality itself. The mark on Caroline's wrist, the cryptic warnings, the chilling letters, each new revelation seemed to lead her down a darker, more twisted path, and yet, the pieces still didn't fit. There was something she was missing, something that had been staring her in the face all along. She just couldn't put her finger on it. For the next few days, Sarah tried to keep her life together, though it was becoming increasingly impossible. She had to protect her family, protect herself, but the weight of the mystery was crushing her. She couldn't stop thinking about the mark on Caroline's wrist, the same mark she had seen in the police archives linked to the original child abduction case. What did it all mean? Why was Caroline suddenly involved in this? Had she been targeted just like Sarah, or was there something more to it? In a desperate bid for clarity, Sarah decided to go back through everything, retracing every step of her investigation. She started reviewing old photographs and police reports once more, searching for anything she might have overlooked. Hours slipped by as she combed through the files, her eyes aching from the strain. But then, as she flipped through a particularly old folder, something caught her attention, an innocent-looking photo of the original missing child. The child's name was Emma, and the picture was a typical school photo, smiling, carefree, a happy child caught in an ordinary moment. But what struck Sarah was the background of the photo. The setting was a local park, one that Sarah had visited countless times in her childhood. It was familiar, comforting, and yet, as her eyes traced the scene in the picture, something felt terribly wrong. At first, she couldn't figure it out, but then it hit her, she had seen that tree. Not in the photograph, but in the memories from her own childhood. There was a large, twisted oak tree in the park, one she used to climb with her brother when they were younger. It was a place she hadn't thought about in years, but now, as she stared at the photo, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Emma, the missing child, had been standing near that same oak tree the day she disappeared. It was a strange coincidence, one Sarah couldn't ignore, and yet, it wasn't just the location that bothered her, it was the way Emma was positioned in the photo. She was facing away from the camera, her eyes fixed on something off to the side, her posture tense. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to piece it together. She had always thought Emma had simply vanished, a victim of some horrific crime. But what if it wasn't that simple? What if Emma had known the person who took her? What if the whole thing had been staged, made to look like an abduction when, in reality, Emma had gone willingly? The more Sarah thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place, and as the horrifying truth dawned on her, she felt her stomach turn. Emma wasn't the only child to go missing. There had been others over the years, children who disappeared without a trace, some linked to the same location, the same park, and the same twisted oak tree. But what if these disappearances weren't isolated events? What if they were all connected in ways she hadn't understood until now? Just as Sarah was about to make this connection, her phone rang. It was Evan. She hadn't heard from him in days, and the call came as a shock. The tone of his voice was different this time, urgent, almost desperate. "Sarah, you have to listen to me," he said, his voice crackling with static. "I know you're still looking into it, but you need to stop. There's something you don't know, something you'll never understand unless you listen to me." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had trusted Evan, trusted him more than anyone else, and now he was telling her to stop digging? That was the last thing she wanted to hear, especially now. "Evan, what's going on? What do you know? Please, just tell me," she demanded, the frustration in her voice rising. There was a long pause before Evan finally spoke again, and when he did, his words sent a chill through Sarah's entire body. "You're not looking for the truth, Sarah. You never were. You think you're investigating the abductions, but you've been chasing ghosts this whole time. The truth is something else entirely, and you've been too blinded by the mystery to see it. I know because I've been a part of it. I helped hide the evidence. I helped keep it buried. But now it's time for you to face the truth." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her mind reeling as she tried to process what Evan had just said. She had trusted him, confided in him, and now he was telling her that everything she thought she knew was wrong. That the truth was something else entirely. She felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat as the weight of his words settled over her. What had she missed? What had she been blind to? Before Sarah could respond, the call abruptly ended. She stared at her phone, her breath coming in short gasps, her mind racing with questions. What had Evan meant? What had he been a part of? And more importantly, why had he hidden this from her? Was he really trying to protect her, or had he been manipulating her all along? With a growing sense of dread, Sarah grabbed her coat and headed out the door. There was no time to waste now. She had to find Evan, had to confront him face to face, and demand the truth. But as she reached the front door, she stopped cold. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a shadow move across the street, someone lurking just outside her field of vision. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the street, but there was nothing there. No one in sight. And yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, more intense than ever. Sarah's mind screamed at her to turn back, to lock the doors, to stop this insane pursuit. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when everything she thought she knew had just been shattered. As she stepped out into the cold night air, a sickening thought hit her like a punch to the gut. What if Evan wasn't the ally she thought he was? What if he was the one who had been orchestrating the entire thing all along? What if everything, the letters, the threats, the mysterious disappearances, had all been a game, a trap, and Sarah had been the one caught in it? The truth was out there, but now Sarah was beginning to wonder if it was even the truth she wanted to find. As she walked deeper into the night, every step felt heavier than the last. The mysteries that had once seemed so simple were now tangled in a web of lies, and the darkness that surrounded her wasn't just a physical presence, it was inside her, too. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she felt this alone. The familiar world around her had disintegrated into something unrecognizable, a jagged maze where every turn brought new dangers, new revelations. It wasn't just the mystery that was closing in on her, it was the people she had trusted, the relationships she had built, that were now shattering before her eyes. The truth was no longer a beacon of hope, it was a prison. Each step she took toward it felt like a step closer to losing everything, and the weight of that realization threatened to crush her. The call from Evan still echoed in her mind. "I helped hide the evidence. I helped keep it buried." His words spun in a vicious circle, making her question everything she had believed about him, about herself, and about the investigation that had consumed her life. He had been the one person she had leaned on, the one person she had trusted when everything else felt like it was falling apart. But now, in a moment of brutal clarity, Sarah realized that trust was a fragile illusion, one she had held onto because it was all she had left in a world full of darkness. If Evan was lying, if he had been part of this all along, then there was no one left who was truly on her side. But even that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the ultimatum that had come just a few hours later. Sarah had gone to the police, hoping that they could finally offer some kind of protection, some kind of support, but instead, she had been met with cold indifference. The officer who had been working on the case, Detective Marshall, pulled her aside in the parking lot after the meeting. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days, but there was something more in his gaze, something she couldn't quite place. "You need to listen to me, Sarah," he had said, his voice low and strained. "Stop looking for the truth. You're not going to like what you find. And if you keep digging, I can't protect you. None of us can. They'll come for you, and they'll make sure no one even knows you were ever here." The fear in his voice had been genuine, raw, and it struck her with a deep sense of unease. Was he really trying to protect her, or was he just another part of the web of lies she had been unraveling? Was he warning her because he knew something she didn't, or was he simply trying to cover his own tracks? The choice was unbearable. She could stop. She could walk away from it all, leave the mystery behind, and let it fade into the obscurity it had been buried in for years. Her life could return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be in the wake of everything that had happened. But the thought of leaving the truth in the darkness, of letting the unanswered questions continue to haunt her, felt impossible. The faces of the missing children, the fragments of the stories she had uncovered, the warning she had received, all of it pressed down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. But what if staying meant losing more than she could bear? What if the price of uncovering the truth was too high? What if by pursuing it, she was condemning herself and the people she loved to a fate worse than ignorance? The emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Every time she thought she was getting closer to the truth, the walls would close in tighter, and the danger would grow more real. She was no longer just chasing a mystery, she was running from something, or someone, who was determined to keep it hidden. Evan had disappeared after his cryptic phone call. His absence only added to the weight on Sarah's shoulders. She needed him, needed answers. But what if he was lying? What if he had already sold her out? She couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing her, manipulating her into digging deeper just so that she would become a target. Maybe the person who had been watching her all this time wasn't after the truth, they were after her. And then there was Caroline. The look in her cousin's eyes when she had collapsed on Sarah's floor haunted her. Sarah had spent years trying to protect Caroline, trying to shield her from the dangers that lurked in the world, but now she wondered if Caroline had been caught up in something much darker than she could ever have imagined. The mark on her wrist, the same one that had been linked to the original child disappearances, it couldn't be a coincidence. But why hadn't Caroline told her everything? Why hadn't she come forward sooner? Was she afraid? Or was there something about Caroline's involvement in all of this that Sarah still didn't understand? Everything Sarah had known was crumbling. The people closest to her, Evan, Caroline, even Detective Marshall, had all become shadows, figures she couldn't quite trust. But one thing was clear, she couldn't do this alone anymore. If she was going to survive this, she needed answers, but more than that, she needed allies. And with each passing hour, she felt that those allies were slipping further and further from her grasp. That's when the decision came. The knock at her door that night wasn't a stranger, it was her father. He hadn't been around much since she was a child, always distant, always hiding behind his work or his own demons. But here he was, standing at the door, his face drawn and pale, like he hadn't slept in days either. His eyes weren't filled with the kind of warmth she had hoped for, there was only fear, and something darker lurking beneath the surface. "Sarah, you need to stop this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you're doing. I know what you've been looking into. And you have to stop now, before it's too late. Before they come for you, too." Her heart sank. She had spent years resenting her father's absence, blaming him for the way her childhood had turned out, but now, standing in front of him, she realized he knew more than he was letting on. His warning wasn't just about her safety, it was about his own involvement in the web she had been uncovering. Stop this before it's too late. Those words echoed in her head, the same words she had heard from Evan, from Detective Marshall, from everyone who had tried to warn her. But what if they weren't just protecting her? What if they were protecting themselves? Dad, what aren't you telling me? Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. What do you know about all of this? About the disappearances? About the people who are watching me? You've been hiding something from me for years. What is it? His face tightened, and for the briefest moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. He didn't speak right away, as though struggling with the weight of a confession he had been avoiding for far too long. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low, almost trembling. You think you're the only one who's been trying to uncover this, Sarah, he said, his eyes darkening. I've been in this longer than you know. Your mother, she was involved in it too. She knew things. She was part of something bigger, something dangerous. And I was trying to protect you from all of it. From the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet shift, as though the very foundation of her life had been upended. Her father, the one person who had always seemed like a distant figure, now stood before her, admitting his own complicity in the web of secrets she had been desperately trying to unravel. And the truth was more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. As she stood there, caught between the past and the present, she realized that her next choice, whether to trust her father, to keep digging for the truth, or to walk away and protect herself, could very well be the most impossible choice of her life. As the words hung in the air, Sarah felt like the ground beneath her feet had been pulled away. Her father's admission, your mother was involved in it too, was a blow that left her gasping for air. The truth, so long buried beneath layers of lies and half-forgotten memories, was suddenly crashing down around her, and she had no choice but to confront it head-on. Her father, the man who had always seemed so distant, so protective in his own way, was now telling her something that shook the very foundation of everything she thought she knew. Her mother had known about the disappearances. She had been part of something bigger, something so twisted and dangerous that Sarah couldn't begin to comprehend it. She stepped back from her father, her mind reeling. No, she whispered, more to herself than to him. No, you're lying. She couldn't. But her father's expression didn't change. His eyes, once warm with affection, were now clouded with something darker, something she couldn't recognize. It wasn't just fear, it was guilt. And something else, something that made her stomach churn with dread. You don't know her like I did, he said quietly, as though he were talking to himself. None of us did. She was good at hiding things, good at hiding what she was really involved in. She had connections, Sarah. Dangerous ones. And I tried to keep you out of it. But now, he looked down at the ground, as though he couldn't bear to meet her eyes. Now, you're too far in. Suddenly, it all made sense, too much sense. The missing children, the dark rumors, the police reports that had never been made public. It wasn't just an isolated case of abductions, this was something systemic. Something far-reaching. Her mother's involvement, her father's cryptic warnings, it was all part of a much bigger conspiracy, a web that had been spun so tightly that it was impossible to untangle. Sarah's breath quickened as she felt the weight of the enormity press down on her chest. It was bigger than just her. Bigger than just Caroline. It was everywhere, stretching its fingers into every corner of their lives, and now it was coming for her. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in as she struggled to process it all. Her father had been protecting her, but he hadn't been honest. He had kept secrets, huge secrets, because he knew the stakes. But the truth was even worse than she had feared. This wasn't just about finding the missing children. It was about stopping something much more dangerous. Something that was already moving against her. As if to punctuate the point, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. Evan. She had been avoiding his calls, terrified of what he might say, but this time, she answered. Evan, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. What's going on? What is happening? You have to tell me everything. I need to know. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then, in a voice that sounded like he was on the edge of breaking, he spoke. "You don't understand, Sarah," Evan said, his voice low and urgent. "You don't know who you're dealing with. The people behind this, they're not just some criminal organization. They have influence everywhere. The police. The politicians. The media. They control everything. And now they know you're onto them." Sarah's heart pounded as the weight of his words sank in. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising with panic. "Who are they? Who's behind this?" There was a brief hesitation, and then Evan's voice dropped to a whisper, as though he feared someone would overhear him. "It's not just about the disappearances. The whole thing was orchestrated from the inside. From the very top. Your mother was part of it, but there's someone higher up, someone even more dangerous. They're pulling the strings. I'm telling you, Sarah, if you keep going, you're not just putting yourself at risk, you're putting everyone you love in danger." The phone went silent, and for a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. "Evan," she whispered, but the line was already dead. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the walls of her life, of everything she had known, were crumbling at a terrifying speed. Her father was hiding something, he had always known more than he was letting on. Evan, too, had been hiding the truth. And now, with this cryptic warning, Sarah realized just how deeply she had been entangled in something much larger than herself. The stakes weren't just her own life, they were everyone's. She couldn't stop. She couldn't walk away now, not with everything at risk. But then, as she stood there, trying to process the enormity of it all, she heard something. A faint sound, footsteps. Soft at first, but then louder, closer. Sarah's heart leapt in her chest. She wasn't alone. She spun around, her eyes darting to the door. The shadows outside the window seemed to shift, and she knew, without a doubt, that someone was watching her. Someone was waiting. The sudden realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just being followed anymore. They were closing in. Whoever they were coming for her. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah grabbed her coat and rushed to the back door, her mind racing. "They know I'm close. They know I'm digging too deep. And now they're coming to silence me." The urgency of the moment made her hands shake as she fumbled with the door lock, the sound of footsteps growing louder in the house. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. She needed to get out, she needed to find Evan. He was the only one who knew enough to help her now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he had led her right into a trap. Just as she stepped into the darkened backyard, she heard a crash from inside the house. Someone was in there, someone had gotten in. Panic surged through her chest as she sprinted toward the gate, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't look back. She couldn't let them catch her. They knew too much. And now they were after her. In the distance, she saw a shadow move in the street. A figure, tall and imposing, standing still, watching. It was too late to turn back. Her heart pounded in her ears as she ran faster, every step echoing in the night air. She had to get away, she had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But as she reached the end of the street, her phone buzzed again. She stopped dead in her tracks. This time, the message wasn't from Evan. It wasn't from anyone she knew. It was a single line of text, a warning, sent in the dead of night. "You're too late. We already have you." The words sent a jolt of fear through her, and as she turned to run, she felt the heavy weight of danger closing in. The conspiracy had grown larger than she could ever imagine, and now, it had her in its grip. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears as she sprinted down the alley, the dark night swallowing her whole. The words of the text still hung in the air, and the fear that gripped her chest was overwhelming. "You're too late. We already have you." She didn't know who had sent it, but she knew one thing for certain: it was no longer just about finding answers. It was about survival. Every step she took, she felt like she was being hunted, like the walls of her world were closing in on her from all sides. She had no allies left, no safe place. Not even her own father could be trusted now. The conspiracies, the betrayals, the lies, everything had been leading to this moment. The truth, if it even existed anymore, felt like a distant memory. But there was one thing Sarah had learned through all of this: she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not after everything. She had to see it through, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. As she neared the abandoned warehouse, the one that had been mentioned in Evan's cryptic warnings, her thoughts spun faster, each one more tangled than the last. Who could she trust? Had Evan led her here to silence her? Was her father a part of this all along, or was he just trying to protect her from something he couldn't control? The only thing she knew for sure was that whatever had been set in motion all those years ago had come to a head in this very place. The missing children, the eerie nursery rhyme, the cryptic messages, it all pointed here. Sarah slowed as she reached the entrance, her breath shallow, her nerves stretched to their breaking point. The old steel doors loomed ahead, graffiti scrawled across their surfaces like warnings in a forgotten language. She hesitated for just a moment, her fingers brushing the cold metal, but then she pushed them open, stepping into the darkened interior. The warehouse was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, but she couldn't see anyone. The shadows stretched long across the space, and for a moment, it was as if time itself had slowed down. It felt like a trap, and yet, Sarah had no choice but to move forward. The sound of her footsteps echoed around her, the only thing breaking the stillness. Then, from the far corner of the room, a voice broke the silence. It was low, cold, and filled with something darker than she could ever have imagined. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah," said the voice, and her stomach twisted. She knew that voice. She recognized it from the police station, from the warnings she had received. Detective Marshall. He had been the one to tell her to stop digging. He had warned her over and over, and now, she understood why. "Why, Marshall?" she demanded, her voice barely a whisper as she forced herself to stand tall. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Why didn't you stop me before it all got this far?" A slow, sinister laugh came from the shadows. "Oh, I tried, Sarah. I really did. But you're stubborn. You had to figure it out yourself." He stepped forward, his face emerging from the darkness. His once stern expression was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "You've been chasing the wrong answers all along. You think this is about the children? About your mother? You're so far off, it's almost laughable." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes narrowed as she took a step forward, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "What the hell is this really about?" Marshall's grin widened, his teeth sharp in the dim light. "It's about control, Sarah. Power. And you, my dear, have been a pawn in a game much bigger than you can understand. You're not the first to get this far, and you won't be the last. But unlike them, you're not going to walk away." His eyes gleamed with a sadistic pleasure. "You're in too deep now. There's no going back." Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The abductions, the mysterious nursery rhyme, the cryptic warnings, all of it was part of a far-reaching plan, one that went far beyond the small circle of people Sarah had been focused on. She had been chasing ghosts, believing she was uncovering something from the past, but in reality, she had been walking into a trap set by those in power, the people who had been controlling everything from the shadows. Marshall stepped closer, his presence looming over her like a predator stalking its prey. "You were never meant to uncover the truth, Sarah. We made sure of that." He paused, as if savoring the moment. "Your mother was just a small part of it. The real players, the ones pulling the strings, have been using you, using your obsession with the past to set the stage for what's to come." His voice grew lower, more sinister. "You were always meant to fail. But now that you've come this far, it's time to clean up the mess." Her pulse pounded in her ears as Sarah took a step back, her mind racing. "Clean up the mess? What do you mean?" she demanded. She was afraid, terrified, really, but she wasn't going to let him see it. "Not now." Marshall's smile faded into something darker, more calculating. "You've seen too much, Sarah. You know too much. You've been a part of this longer than you realize, and now, we're going to make sure you're gone." He nodded, and from the shadows behind him, two figures emerged, stepping into the dim light. One of them was Evan. Her breath caught in her throat. Evan. He looked different, colder, harder. The man she thought she knew was now a stranger, his eyes void of the warmth and care she had once seen there. He stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. I didn't want it to be like this, he said, his voice tight, almost pleading. But you were always too close, Sarah. Too damn close. I couldn't let you ruin everything. The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow, and for a moment, she was paralyzed, her entire world crumbling around her. Evan, the one person she had trusted, the one person she thought she could rely on, was in on it. He had been playing her the entire time. But then, in the midst of the overwhelming shock and betrayal, a new piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about them. It wasn't about Evan or Marshall, or even the missing children. This was about something much larger, something that was just beginning to unfold. I know what you're planning, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger despite the fear and anger threatening to consume her. But it's over. You've made a mistake. I'm not the one who's going to lose this time. Evan's eyes flickered with doubt, and for just a second, Sarah saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the man who had cared about her. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating expression that had become all too familiar. Marshall's eyes glinted with menace. No, Sarah, he said, his voice a low growl. It's you who's lost. And that was when everything changed. The warehouse doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the vast space. Suddenly, lights flickered on, illuminating the entire room, and Sarah saw them, the others. There were more of them than she could have ever imagined. More people, more allies of Marshall, all working together in the shadows. But as Sarah turned to face them, a realization hit her: this wasn't a game. It was a war. And she wasn't about to lose. Not now. Not after everything. In the last moments, as the room seemed to close in around her, she made a choice. It wasn't about running. It wasn't about fighting them. It was about one thing: finding the one last piece of evidence that would bring everything to light. She didn't know how she would do it, but one thing was certain: the truth was going to be exposed. No matter what, the aftermath of that night felt like a distant memory, blurred, fragmented, yet still haunting Sarah's every thought. When the dust finally settled, and the last of the shadows that had controlled her life were exposed, she stood there, staring at the wreckage of everything she had once known. It was over, in a sense. The missing children, the twisted web of conspiracies, the horrifying truths about her mother, and the people who had used her, all of it had been brought to light. The police had swooped in, detaining Marshall, Evan, and every last person involved in the operation. The truth had been set free, but the weight of that truth had a cost. Sarah's world, the one she had once believed to be safe, had fractured in ways she couldn't fully understand. There was no going back to who she had been before. That version of herself, innocent, naive, unaware, was gone, and all that remained was someone who had learned the hard way that trust was a fragile thing. But even as the authorities closed in on the culprits, even as the media poured in to cover the story, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the ending was too neat. Too perfect. She had found the final pieces of the puzzle: her mother's journals, hidden files, and a shocking final confession from Evan, recorded just before his arrest. All of it pointed to a conspiracy that spanned decades, orchestrated by powerful figures who manipulated not only the police and government but also her own family. They had planned it all: the abductions, the nursery rhyme, the slow unraveling of Sarah's life. But in the end, they lost. The truth had won. At least, that's what she told herself. The moment of closure, the one that she had yearned for, came one quiet afternoon in her living room, the weight of the silence pressing down on her. She sat there, the remnants of her mother's journals spread out before her, the words scrawled in faded ink still vivid in her mind. Sarah had learned everything. Every dark secret, every twisted revelation. Yet, there was something else, something more elusive that lingered at the edges of her consciousness. A final page in her mother's journal had been left untouched, as if it had been waiting for Sarah to find it. She had been too afraid to turn it, too afraid to face whatever might be written there. But now, with the house quiet, with the past behind her, she opened it. The page was blank, save for a single phrase written at the top: "This is only the beginning." Her breath caught in her throat. It was as though her mother had known, had foreseen that the truth would come out, but that it would only be the first step in something much larger. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, repeating over and over, refusing to let her forget. And for the first time since this entire nightmare had begun, She felt the weight of something new, a deeper, darker uncertainty. If the conspiracy had been this vast, if the web had stretched this far, what else had they hidden? What other secrets remained, buried beneath layers of deception? Just as she was about to close the journal, there was a knock at the door. Her heart skipped in her chest. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and with everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she wanted to see anyone at all. Slowly, she stood up, her legs trembling beneath her as she walked toward the door. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, wondering if this was it, if someone had finally come to put an end to this once and for all. But when she opened it, there was no one there. Only a small, unmarked envelope, placed carefully on the doorstep. Her breath caught in her throat as she bent down to pick it up. No address, no name, just a single, cryptic message written inside. They are still watching. And they are not finished with you. The words were scrawled hastily, but the meaning was unmistakable. Sarah's heart raced as she felt the cold chill of fear creep back into her bones. She had thought it was over. She had thought that the truth, the justice, would finally bring her peace. But it hadn't. Not really. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the forces behind it were still out there, watching, waiting. She turned the envelope over, hoping for some kind of clue, but there was nothing. Just an eerie, empty back. Her mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked together, but this time, she couldn't make sense of it all. Had she truly uncovered everything? Or was there something bigger, something even darker, lurking just out of reach? And then, as she looked down at the journal one last time, she felt the weight of it, the knowledge, the uncertainty, the fear. It wasn't just about the children anymore. It wasn't even about her mother. It was about them, the ones who had been pulling the strings all along. They weren't finished. Not by a long shot. With trembling hands, Sarah closed the journal. She knew that her life would never be the same again. The truth had set her free, but it had also set something else loose, something far more dangerous. She couldn't help but wonder if, in her search for answers, she had opened a door that she might never be able to close. The darkness was still out there. The game wasn't over. And now, it wasn't just her who was at risk. It was everyone she cared about. As Sarah stepped back from the door, the weight of everything she had learned and uncovered hit her all at once. She could still hear the haunting nursery rhyme in her head, echoing in the silence, as if it had been a warning all along. She had survived the truth, but the price had been steep. The past was behind her, but the future was uncertain. One thing was for sure, they were out there. Watching. Waiting. And as Sarah turned and walked into the dark, silent house, she knew she was far from done. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.